The neighborhood had always seemed quiet, the kind of place where people waved at each other as they collected their mail, where children rode bicycles down wide sidewalks, and where homeowners proudly trimmed their lawns to perfection. At least that's what it looked like on the surface. Beneath the calm exterior of neatly painted fences and well-kept flower beds, there were whispers of tension, arguments over property lines, disputes about HOA rules, and the occasional neighbor who couldn't resist meddling in other people's business. For Michael, a mid-30s homeowner who had recently moved into the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood felt like the perfect place to settle down. He loved the tall oaks that lined the streets, the way the air smelled like freshly cut grass, and the idea of being part of a community. But within weeks, he began noticing something strange. His packages kept disappearing. At first, he thought it was a mistake. The online store must have lost the order, or perhaps the delivery driver left it at the wrong house. It was only a small box, nothing more than some kitchen items. He shrugged it off. Mistakes happened after all. But then, it happened again, and again. Every time a package was delivered, it vanished within hours, sometimes within minutes. Michael became suspicious, and frustration began to build. He double-checked his order confirmations, tracked the deliveries in real time, and even asked the delivery companies for photo proof. Each time, the proof showed his box sitting neatly on the porch, right at the edge of his welcome mat. But by the time he got home from work, it was gone. The missing items weren't luxury goods. They were everyday things. A set of towels, a replacement charger, even a box of coffee pods. But the consistency of the theft gnawed at him. Someone was watching his porch, waiting for deliveries, and stealing them the moment they arrived. Michael started scanning the street, noticing every face. The old couple next door? Too frail, he thought. The family across the street? Always too busy wrangling their kids. But there was one person who seemed to stand out more than anyone else. Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down. She was well known in the neighborhood, though not in the way most people wanted. She was the self-appointed enforcer of rules, constantly reminding others about HOA guidelines, commenting on lawn lengths, and writing passive-aggressive notes about acceptable decor. She seemed to take pleasure in inserting herself into other people's lives, as though the cul-de-sac belonged to her alone. Michael had noticed her watching him before. Her blinds would shift slightly when he carried groceries inside. Her head would turn when a delivery truck stopped at his house. And though she often disguised her actions with fake politeness, there was an edge in her demeanor that unsettled him. The missing packages soon became more than an inconvenience. They became a mystery he was determined to solve. He began arriving home earlier than usual, hoping to catch the thief in the act, but the porch was always empty by the time he got there. He asked a couple of neighbors if they'd seen anything suspicious, but they only shrugged, unwilling to get involved. Days turned into weeks, and the thefts continued. Michael's patience wore thin. It wasn't about the items anymore. It was about principle. Someone was violating his space, invading his property, and he wasn't going to let it slide. One evening, as he stood on his porch, staring at the empty space where yet another package should have been, he made a decision. If the thief wanted to keep stealing from him, then he would give them something to steal. But it wouldn't be what they expected. The trap was already forming in his mind. He envisioned it clearly, a box that looked just like any other delivery, taped up neatly with a shipping label. But inside, instead of valuable goods, there would be something unforgettable. Something that would teach the thief a lesson they wouldn't forget. He thought about harmless but humiliating surprises, things that wouldn't cause physical harm but would be enough to make the thief think twice before ever touching his porch again. The thought made him smile for the first time in weeks. If Karen, or whoever the culprit was, wanted to play games, then Michael was ready to play back. Only this time, he would be the one in control. As night fell, he went back inside and opened his laptop. He began ordering supplies, making a list of ideas, and planning every step with precision. Tomorrow, The real game would begin. But what Michael didn't realize was that his plan would spiral far beyond what he imagined. The trap wouldn't just expose the thief. It would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire neighborhood, bring the HOA into chaos, and leave Karen with a humiliation so viral that even the police would get involved. And so, with determination burning in his mind, Michael prepared for battle. His porch, once a place of vulnerability, was about to become a battlefield. The thief had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Michael awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. For weeks, the stolen packages had left him feeling powerless, as though someone else controlled his home and privacy. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was the one holding the strings. He wasn't simply waiting for something to happen, he was planning it. And the anticipation was thrilling. He started small. He retrieved an empty shipping box from his recycling bin, carefully taped it back together, and placed some old newspapers inside for weight. At first, he considered leaving it at that, a decoy with nothing of value inside. But that idea felt unsatisfying. The thief would only shrug, realize it was useless, and move on. No, Michael wanted impact. He wanted a react. Ion. The question became, what could he put inside that would leave the thief too embarrassed or too humiliated to ever try again? He brainstormed through the day. Glitter bombs crossed his mind, the kind of prank device that would explode in a burst of shimmering chaos. The thought of Karen, or whoever the culprit was, covered head to toe in sparkling glitter made him laugh. It was harmless, yet infuriatingly difficult to clean up. That alone seemed like poetic justice. But the glitter bomb idea wasn't enough. He wanted more than mess. He wanted proof. That's when he decided to add a second layer to his plan. Surveillance. Michael ordered a small motion-activated camera that could be hidden in the corner of his porch. He also dug out an old phone that still worked on Wi-Fi, planning to angle it from inside a window for backup footage. If the thief took the bait, Michael would capture every second of it. The footage would be undeniable proof, not only for the HOA but also for the police, if things escalated further. 2 days later, the equipment arrived. Ironically, he almost laughed at the sight of the delivery truck. This time, the package made it into his hands safely. He set everything up carefully, testing the angles of the cameras and ensuring they blended into the environment. One was hidden near a potted plant, the other tucked discreetly behind a wooden decoration. Together they created a full view of his porch. With the cameras ready, it was time for the centerpiece. The bait package. Michael purchased a glitter bomb kit online and assembled it late into the night. He double-checked the mechanism, making sure it would trigger as soon as the box was opened. Then, with meticulous care, he placed it inside the shipping box and sealed it with professional-looking tape. He even printed a fake shipping label to give it authenticity. It looked no different from any OT, her delivery. The stage was set. The next morning, he placed the bait package right in the middle of his porch, in clear view from the street. He positioned it as if it had just been delivered, slightly tilted, the label facing outward. From his living room window, he could see it perfectly. The cameras were rolling, the trap was armed, and all he had to do was wait. Hours passed. Delivery trucks came and went for other houses. A few neighbors strolled by, walking their dogs or chatting on the sidewalk. Every time someone slowed near his house, Michael's pulse quickened. Would they be the one to take the bait? And then, just after noon, it happened. From the corner of his eye, Michael saw movement. A figure emerged from the sidewalk, pretending to glance casually at the lawns. But there was nothing casual about the way she moved. It was Karen. Her eyes darted toward the porch. She hesitated, glanced around as if to make sure no one was watching, and then approached. She bent down quickly, scooped up the box, and hugged it tightly against her chest. For a moment, she looked like a child caught sneaking candy, glancing nervously in every direction. And then she briskly walked back toward her house, the package tucked under her arm. Michael's cameras captured everything. He could barely contain his excitement. The footage was clear. Karen had stolen the package without hesitation. But the best part hadn't even happened yet. He knew the moment she tried to open it, her world would explode, literally, in a cloud of glitter. Michael imagined the scene vividly. Karen opening the box inside her pristine, overly decorated living room, expecting something valuable. The instant the lid popped, glitter would spray everywhere, sticking to her hair, her clothes, her furniture. No vacuum or cleaning product could get rid of it completely. Every speck would serve as a reminder of her crime. He waited. And sure enough, within minutes, there was a faint sound from down the street. A sharp pop, followed by a muffled scream. Even from his house, Michael could see a faint shimmer of glitter floating near Karen's front door when she angrily stomped outside, her hands and shirt sparkling in the sunlight. It was everything he had hoped for. But Karen wasn't the type to accept humiliation quietly. Within an hour, she stormed over to his house, glitter still clinging stubbornly to her clothes. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She simply marched up to his porch and stood there, arms crossed, glaring furiously at his front window. Michael didn't move. He stayed inside, watching silently as she fumed. Eventually she left, muttering to herself. But her reaction told him everything he needed to know. She knew she had been caught, and she was furious about it. Michael now had the upper hand. He had proof, he had footage, and he had exposed her in a way she would never forget. But he also knew something else. Karen wasn't going to back down. Not her. This was only the beginning. And deep down, Michael understood that his trap had set something much bigger in motion. The stolen packages were only the first spark. What came next would be a full-blown war, one that would drag the entire neighborhood into the chaos. The battle lines had been drawn, and the real drama was just about to begin. The neighborhood had always prided itself on appearances, neatly trimmed hedges, freshly painted shutters, and driveways swept free of leaves. But beneath that careful image, the simmering tensions had always existed, hidden beneath polite smiles and short greetings. When Michael exposed Karen's package theft with his glitter trap, the delicate balance shattered. For a brief moment, he thought he had won. He had the footage, the proof, and the satisfaction of watching Karen sparkle in humiliation as she stomped back into her house. It was sweet revenge, clean and simple. But he underestimated one thing: Karen's inability to accept defeat. By the next morning, the retaliation began. It started with a letter taped to his front door, written in bold, angry handwriting. It wasn't an admission, nor was it an apology. Instead, it was filled with accusations, claims that Michael had set a dangerous device on his porch, that he had violated HOA safety regulations, and that he posed a risk to the neighborhood. The irony of a thief calling her victim dangerous wasn't lost on him, but he knew Karen well enough to realize she wouldn't stop there. Later that day, an email landed in his inbox. It was from the HOA board, calling for an urgent meeting to discuss concerns raised by a resident regarding unsafe activity. Michael didn't need to guess who the resident was. Karen had gone running to the board, twisting the story to paint herself as the victim. It was a classic Karen move, caught red-handed yet still determined to turn the tables. Michael prepared himself. He gathered the video footage from his cameras, stored copies on multiple devices, and even saved screenshots of delivery confirmations to show that his original packages had gone missing. He knew the truth was on his side, but truth alone wasn't always enough when dealing with someone like Karen. The meeting took place in the HOA clubhouse, a modest building at the end of the street where residents usually gathered for holiday parties or community updates. This time, the atmosphere was far from festive. The board members sat stiffly at a long table, papers in front of them, their expressions already tense. Karen was there too, sitting smugly with her arms crossed, glitter still faintly visible in her hair despite her best attempts to scrub it away. The board listened as she spoke first, her voice sharp and filled with self-righteous indignation. She painted Michael as a reckless homeowner who had booby-trapped a package in violation of community safety standards. She claimed she had discovered the box while walking past his house, only to be assaulted by a dangerous device. She leaned heavily into dramatics, insisting she could have been seriously harmed. Some board members nodded along, clearly uncomfortable. They weren't used to conflict, and Karen's confidence gave her words a veneer of credibility. For a moment, it seemed as though her version of events might stick. But then Michael calmly presented his evidence. He played the footage on a screen, showing Karen approaching his porch, glancing around suspiciously, and then taking the package without hesitation. The video was undeniable. Gasps echoed in the room as neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Karen's composure faltered for the first time, but she quickly recovered, insisting it had been a misunderstanding, and that she thought the box had been left out as trash. The excuse was laughable, but Michael didn't need to argue. The footage spoke for itself. The board, however, was divided. Some members acknowledged the clear theft, while others worried about the trap Michael had set, concerned about liability and neighborhood reputation. The discussion dragged on, filled with back-and-forth arguments. Karen interrupted frequently, raising her voice, while Michael remained patient, letting the evidence do the talking. In the end, the board refused to take decisive action. They issued a vague statement urging both parties to de-escalate tensions and warned against provocative behavior. It was a non-committal verdict, the kind that satisfied no one. Karen left fuming, muttering loudly about lawsuits and police reports. Michael left frustrated, realizing that the board's neutrality had only emboldened her. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Within days, Karen escalated her retaliation. Michael noticed new complaints being filed against him, minor, petty accusations that the HOA was now obligated to investigate. His grass was allegedly too long. His trash cans were supposedly left out too early. Even his holiday lights, which hadn't been a problem before, suddenly became a violation. Each time he received a notice from the board, and each time he knew exactly who was behind it. Karen wasn't just angry. She was determined to bury him under technicalities. But Michael wasn't one to back down. He meticulously complied with every rule, trimming his lawn to regulation height, photographing his trash cans with timestamps, and double-checking every detail. At the same time, he quietly built his case against Karen. He saved every complaint, every notice, and every scrap of evidence. If she wanted to play dirty, he was ready to play smarter. The tension in the neighborhood grew thicker by the day. Neighbors whispered about the feud, some siding with Michael after seeing the video, others too wary of Karen's wrath to say anything at all. The once quiet cul-de-sac now felt like a battleground, each house caught in the middle of a war between two determined opponents. Then came the moment that shifted everything. One evening, Michael returned home to find his car keyed. Deep scratches ran across the driver's side, etched into the paint with malicious precision. It was no longer about stolen packages or petty complaints. This was personal. Though he had no direct proof that Karen was responsible, he didn't need much imagination to know who had motive. The escalation was clear. Karen wasn't going to stop until she destroyed him. But Michael wasn't broken. If anything, the damage only hardened his resolve. He realized the glitter trap had been only the opening move in a much larger game. Karen wanted war, and war was what she would get. What she didn't realize was that Michael was already preparing his next strike, one that would go far beyond glitter. One that would expose her not just to the HOA, but to the entire word, LD. And as the first whispers of his plan began to form in his mind, Michael knew the battle was about to reach a level neither of them could control. The scratches on Michael's car were more than vandalism. They were a message, a declaration of war etched into the metal of his property. He stared at the damage under the dim glow of his driveway light, his fists tightening at his sides. Karen had crossed a line. The stolen packages had been irritating, the petty HOA complaints had been annoying, but this was malicious destruction. She wasn't trying to inconvenience him anymore. She was trying to break him. But Michael was not a man easily broken. That night, as he sat in his living room, the weight of the feud pressing on his chest, he decided he was finished playing defensively. The glitter trap had been a warning shot, a playful yet humiliating move. Karen hadn't learned from it. Instead, she had doubled down, twisting reality and trying to bury him under rules and retaliation. If the HOA wouldn't hold her accountable, and if neighbors were too afraid to step in, then it was up to him to deliver justice. And this time, justice would not stay confined within the cul-de-sac. Michael opened his laptop, scrolled through his saved camera footage, and carefully edited the clip of Karen stealing the bait package. He didn't add commentary or exaggeration. He didn't need to. The video spoke volumes on its own. Karen's shifty glances, her hurried steps, the way she cradled the stolen box like contraband. It was all crystal clear. And for the grand finale, her glitter-covered appearance as she stomped back onto her porch. It was undeniable, damning evidence of her guilt. The video was ready, but Michael wasn't reckless. He weighed his options carefully. If he posted it online, Karen would become the laughingstock of not just the neighborhood, but potentially thousands of angers across the internet. She'd be exposed, her smug authority shattered by the weight of public humiliation. It was the kind of revenge she couldn't twist or talk her way out of. But going public carried risks. Karen was volatile, unpredictable. She might try to retaliate harder, perhaps even involve lawyers. Yet Michael reasoned with himself. She had already keyed his car, filed false complaints, and stolen from him repeatedly. She had left him no choice. By the next morning, the video was online. Michael uploaded it under a simple title: Neighbor Caught Stealing Packages, Instant Karma. He didn't name her, didn't mention the neighborhood, and didn't show his own face. He kept it clean, focused solely on the act. At first, nothing happened. A few views trickled in, then a handful of comments from strangers laughing at the glitter explosion. But within hours, the numbers skyrocketed. The clip was short, clear, and satisfying, the perfect recipe for virality. It spread across platforms, shared by people who relished the downfall of a nosy, entitled neighbor. By the end of the day, it had tens of thousands of views. By the end of the week, hundreds of thousands. Karen had gone viral, and she didn't even know it yet. The shift in the neighborhood was immediate. Neighbors who had once kept quiet now whispered more openly, some chuckling as Karen passed by, others avoiding her altogether. She could feel the shift in the air. Her authority, once bolstered by fear and intimidation, was crumbling under the weight of ridicule. She stormed around angrily, glaring at anyone who dared to make eye contact, but her power was slipping. When Karen finally discovered the video, the eruption was inevitable. She marched to Michael's porch one evening, her voice shrill enough to pierce through his closed windows, her fists clenched at her sides. She ranted and raved, but Michael didn't step outside. He didn't need to. The world had already seen who she was. No amount of shouting on his lawn could undo the evidence. Days later, Karen tried another tactic. She called the police. She claimed Michael had harassed her, spread lies about her online, and even accused him of tampering with her property. But when officers arrived and Michael calmly showed them the unedited footage, their expressions told the story. The theft was undeniable, and the so-called lies were nothing but the truth. The officers gave Karen a warning and left, clearly unimpressed with her theatrics. That moment broke something inside her. She wasn't just humiliated now. She was powerless. Yet instead of retreating, Karen spiraled deeper into chaos. She stormed into HOA meetings, demanding that Michael be fined, expelled, even sued. She waved papers in the air, citing bylaws she didn't fully understand, trying desperately to regain her grip on authority. But with each outburst, she alienated more board members. The video had shifted perception. No one wanted to be aligned with her anymore. Michael, meanwhile, kept his composure. He trimmed his lawn, brought in his trash cans on time, and smiled politely at his neighbors. He knew the battle wasn't finished, but he could feel the tide turning in his favor. The more Karen flailed, the more foolish she appeared. The more foolish she appeared, the stronger his position became. But Karen wasn't finished yet. Late one night, Michael noticed movement outside his window. He peeked through the blinds and saw Karen lingering near his driveway, her phone in hand, snapping pictures of his house. She paced back and forth, muttering under her breath, as though she were gathering evidence for her next crusade. He considered stepping outside but decided against it. Instead, he let his cameras record everything. Another piece of proof, another brick in the wall closing around her. Still, Michael couldn't shake the unease. Karen had already vandalized his car. Hat would stop her from escalating further. A rock through his window. A false police report? He realized the feud had grown beyond neighborly conflict. It was a full-scale war, and wars rarely ended cleanly. The next morning, he awoke to find his mailbox knocked over, its post splintered at the base. The mail inside was scattered across his lawn, trampled and torn. It was another petty act of destruction, another line crossed. Michael knew then that the final confrontation was inevitable. Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was unraveling. And when people like her unraveled, they dragged everyone else into the chaos. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some residents whispered that Karen might face criminal charges. Others speculated about whether the HOA would finally remove her from the board. Everyone seemed to be watching, waiting, as if the entire street had become an audience to the ongoing feud. And through it all, Michael remained steady. He didn't retaliate with anger or destruction. Instead, he prepared his next move carefully, strategically. If Karen wanted to escalate, he would meet her escalation with evidence, exposure, and precision. Because this wasn't just about stolen packages anymore. This was about principle, about standing up to someone who had terrorized the neighborhood for years. And deep down, Michael knew the climax was coming. The feud had reached a boiling point, and the explosion would be far bigger than glitter. The morning after his mailbox was destroyed, Michael stood at the edge of his driveway, surveying the wreckage. Splintered wood lay scattered across the grass, envelopes trampled and torn, the pieces of his mailbox sprawled like the remains of a battlefield. Neighbors slowed their cars as they passed, their eyes flicking between the mess and Michael's steady figure. Nobody stopped, but everyone knew. The feud was no longer a whisper. It was the headline of the entire cul-de-sac. Michael didn't call cares, out directly. He didn't storm over to her house or shout across the street. Instead, he quietly documented everything. Photos of the damage, time-stamped recordings from his cameras, reports filed neatly with the local police. Every petty act of destruction she committed became another stone in the fortress of evidence he was building. But Karen was unraveling faster than he anticipated. The viral video had spread beyond anything she could control. Strangers online mocked her, turning her glitter-covered humiliation into memes and reaction clips. She couldn't walk her dog without feeling eyes on her. She couldn't check her mail without catching muffled laughter from across the street. She was no longer the feared enforcer of rules. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale. That loss of power cut deeply. For years, she had thrived on the illusion of control, wielding HOA rules like weapons and keeping her neighbors under her thumb. Now, that illusion had crumbled. And when people like Karen lost control, they didn't fade quietly. They exploded. At the next HOA meeting, the meltdown began. Residents gathered in the clubhouse expecting another tense but typical discussion about neighborhood upkeep. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a spectacle. Karen stormed in, her binder of rules clutched tightly in one hand, her phone in the other. She launched into a tirade before the meeting even began, her voice echoing off the walls. She accused Michael of harassment, of cyberbullying, of orchestrating a neighborhood conspiracy against her. She waved her phone, claiming she had evidence of his crimes, though the screen only displayed blurry photos of his house and his driveway. She demanded fines, expulsions, even arrests. Her voice cracked as she shouted, desperation bleeding through every word. But the room wasn't on her side anymore. Neighbors who once tolerated her. Intimidation now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some shook their heads, others whispered quietly to one another. And when Michael calmly played the video footage again, this time directly for the board and the assembled residents, the room erupted with murmurs. The truth was undeniable. Karen wasn't a victim. She was the thief, the vandal, the instigator. Her face flushed red as she realized the crowd was against her. Her words grew shriller, her accusations wilder. She claimed Michael had doctored the footage, that neighbors were plotting together, that she was being persecuted. She slammed her binder onto the table so hard the papers scattered across the floor. The board members, once hesitant to confront her, finally intervened. They called for order, but Karen's meltdown couldn't be contained. The meeting ended abruptly, with board members escorting her out. It was the first time she had been silenced in public, the first time her authority had been stripped away so visibly. For the neighborhood, it was a turning point. For Karen, it was a humiliation she couldn't recover from. But humiliation wasn't the end. It was fuel. That night, Michael awoke to the sound of pounding on his front door. The noise was frantic, unrelenting, as though someone was trying to break the door down. His cameras captured it all. Karen on his porch, her hair disheveled, her face twisted with fury, her fists slamming against the wood. She shouted into the night, her words muffled through the door but dripping with venom. Michael didn't open. He didn't need to. He simply let the cameras roll, documenting her unhinged behavior. Eventually, the pounding stopped. Karen stumbled back down his walkway, disappearing into the darkness. By morning, the footage was already in the hands of the police. When officers arrived at Karen's house later that day, the neighborhood watched from behind curtains and half-open blinds. Lights flashed against her garage door as the officer spoke with her on the porch. Her voice carried across the cul-de-sac, indignant and frantic, but her protests meant nothing. The officers had the footage, the reports, and weeks of evidence stacked against her. They didn't arrest her that day, but the warning was clear. One more step out of line and she would face real consequences. For Michael, it was a bittersweet moment. He had won the neighborhood's sympathy, and Karen's crumbling reputation was almost beyond repair. But the unease lingered. She was unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. He didn't know whether she would lash out harder or finally collapse under the weight of her own actions. The neighborhood, too, was changing. Where once Karen's word had been law, now laughter followed in her footsteps. Children mimicked her glitter explosion in play. Adults exchanged knowing glances when she walked by. She had become the very thing she despised most. A joke. Yet the war wasn't finished. Michael sensed it in the way Karen glared at him from her porch, her eyes burning with resentment. He sensed it in the whispered conversations between board members, discussing whether she should be removed entirely from the HOA. And he sensed it in the pit of his stomach, a quiet warning that the final act had not yet played out. Because Karen wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. She would go out swinging, even if it meant dragging the entire neighborhood down with her. And when that moment came, Michael would be ready. His cameras were always on, his evidence airtight. He had turned his home into a fortress of truth. The stage was set for the final confrontation, and this time, there would be no going back. The cul-de-sac had changed. Once a quiet stretch of identical houses and carefully maintained lawns, it now buzzed with the tension of a neighborhood under siege. Karen's name was on everyone's lips, whispered over fences, muttered, "Do." Ring morning walks, dissected in hushed tones at community gatherings. The viral video had ripped away her mask of authority, and every meltdown since had only deepened her infamy. But while most neighbors treated the feud like entertainment, Michael lived it. Every day brought new uncertainty, another act of vandalism, another petty complaint, another furious outburst. He had turned his home into a fortress of surveillance, cameras covering every angle, lights set to motion sensors, evidence stored neatly in folders. Karen's behavior was unpredictable, but he knew one thing for certain. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Michael had just settled into his living room when the sound of shattering glass ripped through the night. His cameras captured it instantly, the image of Karen, wild-eyed, hurling a rock through one of his front windows. Shards scattered across the floor as she stood outside, chest heaving, glaring into the darkened room. For a long, tense moment, she didn't move. She just stood there, as if daring him to come outside. And then, almost as suddenly as she appeared, she turned and ran, retreating to the safety of her house. This time, there would be no warnings, no board meetings, no vague letters urging de-escalation. Michael called the police, and within minutes, flashing lights cut across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors gathered at their windows, their faces lit by the glow, watching history unfold. When the officers knocked on Karen's door, she resisted. Her shrill voice carried down the street as she insisted she was the victim, that she had been provoked, that she was protecting the neighborhood from a dangerous man. But the officers had seen the footage. The evidence was airtight. Her protests only sealed her fate. And then, in a moment that would etch itself into the memory of every resident, Karen was led out of her house in handcuffs. The sight was surreal. The woman who had once terrorized the neighborhood with complaints and accusations, who had strutted around as the self-appointed enforcer of rules, was now being escorted into the back of a police car, her face pale and streaked with tears. The neighborhood was silent, save for the faint hum of the engine as the car pulled away. It was over. For Michael, the relief was overwhelming. Weeks of tension, of constant retaliation and fear, dissolved in the glow of justice finally served. He boarded up his broken window, but the damage didn't bother him anymore. It was just glass. Replaceable. What mattered was that Karen's reign of terror had ended. The following days brought a strange calm to the cul-de-sac. The HOA, embarrassed by how long they had tolerated Karen's behavior, moved swiftly to remove her from the board. A formal letter was distributed to all residents, apologizing for the oversight and promising stricter oversight of board members in the future. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet now approached Michael with nods of respect, some even offering words of thanks. The feud had been ugly, but it had also freed the neighborhood from a bully who had held power for far too long. Online, Karen's downfall became legend. The viral video that started it all now had millions of views. News outlets picked it up, spinning it into stories about porch piracy, neighborhood feuds, and the dangers of HOA politics. Comment sections filled with strangers cheering Michael's clever trap, laughing at Karen's glitter-coated humiliation, and debating whether she had gotten what she deserved. Karen's name became synonymous with entitlement, her actions immortalized in pixels and laughter. For her, it was a humiliation from which she could never fully recover. For Michael, it was vindication. But beyond the satisfaction, there was also reflection. The feud had consumed weeks of his life, filled his days with stress and unease, and transformed his peaceful neighborhood into a battlefield. Winning didn't erase that. As he sat on his porch one quiet evening, the air cool and still, he realized the true victory wasn't just Karen's downfall, it was the return of peace. Packages once again appeared on his porch and remained untouched until he retrieved them. His car sat safely in the driveway, unmarred. His mailbox stood upright, replaced and sturdy. The cameras still watched, but now they captured nothing more than passing cars and children riding bicycles. The war was over, and normal life was slowly returning. Yet there was one final, unshakable truth. Karen had written herself into the history of the cul-de-sac, and that history would never be forgotten. Her downfall was not just Michael's story, it was the neighborhood's. A cautionary tale of entitlement, pettiness, and the dangers of underestimating those who refuse to be pushed around. For Michael, it was a lesson too. Not just about vigilance or persistence, but about standing firm when faced with injustice. He hadn't sought conflict, but when it came to his doorstep, literally, he had fought back, not with violence, but with patience, strategy, and evidence. And in the end, that was what had brought victory. The porch, once a place of vulnerability, had become a symbol of triumph. And as the sun set behind the rooftops, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, Michael allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. The neighborhood was quiet again. The war was over. And this time, peace wasn't an illusion. It was earned.